I clawed my way back from somewhere I was never supposed to return from, and the first thing I did when I could finally hold a pen was write my son's name. Not because I needed to remember it. I could never forget it. I wrote it because I needed to prove to myself that my hand still worked, that I was still here, that the 8 years I had lost were real, and that what came next was going to be real too. My name is Harold. I am 63 years old. I was a hotel owner, a father, a man who believed that blood was the one thing in this world you could trust without question. I was wrong about that last part. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. 8 years is a long time, and people need to understand what I had before they can understand what was taken. I built the Ashwood Inn with my own hands. Not literally, but close enough. I was 41 years old when I bought the property, a run-down Victorian on 4 acres outside of Greenville, South Carolina. My wife had been gone 3 years by then. Breast cancer, fast and merciless, the way it always is. She left me with a 17-year-old son named Thomas, and a grief I didn't know what to do with, so I put it into the building. We worked on that place together, Thomas and I, every weekend for 2 years. He learned how to strip wallpaper, how to sand hardwood floors until your arms gave out, how to replace crown molding without splitting the plaster. I taught him everything I knew, which wasn't much, but we figured the rest out together. By the time we opened, Thomas was 19 and the Ashwood Inn had 12 rooms, a front porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house, and a reputation for the best complimentary breakfast in the county. I ran it for 6 years. Built it up to 22 rooms, added a small event space in the old carriage house out back. Started hosting weddings, anniversary dinners, corporate retreats. The property had grown into something neither of us had imagined when we were scraping paint off the baseboards at midnight. Thomas worked alongside me for most of that time. He had a gift for the hospitality side of things, the way I never did. He could remember a guest's name after hearing it once, remember what they ordered at breakfast, ask about their granddaughter's recital 2 months later like he'd been thinking about it the whole time. Guests loved him. Staff loathed him. I was proud of him in the way that sometimes catches you off guard, so sharp it almost hurts. In 2016, I signed the property over to Thomas. He was 25. I had just turned 55, and I had been thinking about stepping back, maybe buying a small cottage somewhere, maybe traveling. I had my name on enough accounts to live comfortably. I wasn't walking away. I had an arrangement with Thomas, an informal one, the kind you make with your own son. He would run the inn. I would remain a silent partner. The property was his, but the foundation we built together was ours. I kept my suite on the 2nd floor, room 7, the one with the bay window that looks out over the rose garden. 3 months after I signed the papers, I was driving back from a supplier meeting in Columbia when a pickup truck ran a red light and hit my car on the driver's side at 50 miles an hour. They told me afterward that I was in surgery for 11 hours. They told me that I had a traumatic brain injury, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a shattered left femur. They told me I was in a coma for 8 years. I didn't know any of that while it was happening. One moment I was driving. The next moment I was waking up in a hospital bed with a nurse I didn't recognize standing over me, saying my name in a voice like she had said it many times before and never expected an answer. The nurse's name was Priya. She had kind eyes and very steady hands, and she cried when I squeezed her fingers back. The hospital was in Greenville. I had been there the whole time in a long-term care facility on the 4th floor of a building I had driven past 100 times without ever looking at. My neurologist, a measured man named Dr. Tu, Castellan, told me that recovery from prolonged coma is different for every patient, that I would need months of rehabilitation before I could consider living independently, that I should not expect everything to come back at once. What he did not tell me, because he did not know, was what I was going to find when I finally got out. I did not call Thomas from the hospital. This was a decision I made deliberately, and it is the one I am most often asked about. Why didn't you call your son the moment you woke up? Why didn't you let him know you were alive? The honest answer is that I asked about him in those first foggy days, and what I was told did not sit right with me. I asked the floor nurse, an older woman named Gertie, who had been working that unit for 20 years, whether my son had been in contact, whether he had been visiting. She looked at me with an expression that told me everything before she said a word. "We sent notifications to the family contact on file," she said carefully. "Your brother, I believe, was the one who handled most of the administrative matters." My brother. I had a younger brother. His name is Floyd. Floyd is 58 years old, 7 years younger than me, and we had never been close in the way that some brothers are. He was always around the edges of my life, at Christmas, at the occasional family event, calling when he needed something. He was charming the way a salesman is charming, which is to say, he made you feel good right up until the moment you realized what you'd agreed to. I had listed Floyd as an emergency contact years ago, back when I was first setting up the business and Thomas was still a teenager. I had never thought to update it. I asked Gertie to let me see the visitor log. She hesitated. Then she got it for me. Floyd had visited 4 times in the first year, then once more in year 2. After that, nothing. Thomas had visited 3 times in the first year. His last recorded visit was in 2017, the year after my accident. That was the year Thomas would have been 26 years old. I lay in that hospital bed for a long time after Gertie left, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what that meant. I was discharged from the rehabilitation center in April of this year. 8 months of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. I had come back slower than I used to be, with a left leg that aches when rain is coming and a tendency to lose words mid-sentence. But I came back. Dr. Tom Castellan said I was, medically speaking, something of a miracle. I had one of my nurses make a few quiet phone calls before I left. What she found out confirmed what I had already suspected. The Ashwood Inn was still operating. It had been renamed. It was called the Hargrove House now, which meant nothing to me at first, until I understood that Hargrove was Floyd's wife's maiden name, my sister-in-law. A woman named Bernice, who I had met fewer than 10 times in my life. Floyd and Bernice had been operating the inn for at least 4 years. According to the county records, which are public, Floyd had been listed as the property's managing trustee since 2018, which was the year after my son stopped visiting me. There was something else, something I had to read twice before I understood it. Thomas was still there. He was listed in the county employment records as a staff member at the Hargrove House. My son, the boy who had stripped wallpaper alongside me until midnight, who had a gift for remembering every guest's name, who I had signed that property to, was working as an employee at his own family's inn. I did not call. I did not write. I rented a car, drove to Greenville, and checked into a motel 3 miles from the Ashwood. I drove past the inn twice before I went in. It still looked like what I had built. The wraparound porch was still there. The rose garden was still in bloom. The carriage house had a new sign above the door that read, F in space and Lown. They had painted the exterior a different color, a pale blue where there used to be cream. Other than that, from the outside, it was still my building. I walked in on a Tuesday afternoon in early May. The lobby smelled the same. Wood polish and something faintly floral, the same air that used to meet guests when they stepped to the front door 20 years ago. I had not smelled it in 8 years, and I had to stop walking for a moment. A young woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Welcome to Hargrove House. Do you have a reservation?" "I do," I said. I had booked online under my middle name, checking in for the week. She got me sorted efficiently, handed me a keycard, and told me that breakfast was served in the main dining room from 7 to 10. I thanked her and took my bag upstairs. They had given me room 9, not room 7. I told myself it didn't matter. I spent the first evening sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the staff come and go. I was 63 years old and had just spent 8 years in a hospital bed. I could afford to be patient. I saw my son the next morning. He came through the side door of the dining room carrying a rack of clean glasses, wearing a white shirt with the Hargrove House logo on the chest. He was 33 now. He had his mother's dark hair and something around his eyes that I recognized as mine. He moved the way he always had, efficient and unhurried, setting the glasses on the shelf behind the bar with a quiet competence that no one in the room seemed to notice. I sat at a table in the corner, and I watched him for a long time. He did not look at me. Why would he? To him, I was just another guest. I didn't say anything that morning. I ordered my eggs, and I drank my coffee, and I watched my son work, and I thought about what Floyd had done, and I kept my face very still. I spent 3 days at the inn before I understood the full picture. Floyd and Bernice were not living on the property, but they were there most mornings. Floyd was a big man, always had been, broader than me, louder, the kind of person who fills a room by volume alone. I watched him greet guests at breakfast like he had built the place himself. I watched him clap his staff on the shoulder and laugh at his own jokes. I watched him walk through my lobby like he owned it. He did not recognize me at first. I had aged in 8 years in ways that tend to obscure a person. I was thinner, my hair had gone fully white, I moved more slowly. On the second day, he passed me on the porch and nodded the way you nod at a guest and kept walking. On the third day, he sat down across from me. "Enjoying your stay," he said, with the easy smile I had been watching him use on everyone else. "Very much," I said. "Beautiful property." "Been in the family a long time," he said. I looked at him. "Is that right?" "My family built this place," Floyd said. "Well, I took it over under some difficult circumstances, but we really made something of it." I said, "Difficult circumstances." He nodded, like it was a sad story he had told many times. "My brother passed. It was a hard time for all of us." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He thanked me and excused himself to go greet someone else. I sat there with my iced tea, and I thought about what he had just told me. My brother passed. He had decided I was dead. He had told my son I was dead, or as good as, had let the visits taper off until Thomas believed there was nothing left to visit, and then he had stepped into the space I left behind. What I needed now was documentation. I had been thinking about this since the hospital. I had hired an attorney before I left the rehabilitation center. Her name was Miss Fowler, and she was the kind of woman who spoke very quietly and moved very fast. In the week before I arrived in Greenville, she had been gathering what we needed: medical records confirming my 8 years of continuous hospitalization, the original deed transfer to Thomas from 2016, and documentation of the trusteeship Floyd had established in 2018. What Miss Fowler had found, and what I was now reading in my room at the Hargrove house, was a paper trail that made me feel very cold and very clear at the same time. In 2018, Floyd had petitioned the county probate court to be appointed trustee of the property on the grounds that Thomas, then 27 years old, was unable to manage the estate due to emotional instability following family trauma. The petition had been granted with minimal review, which Miss Fowler said was unfortunately common in cases involving incapacitated property owners. Under the trusteeship, Floyd had given himself full management authority over the inn's operations, accounts, and income. Thomas had been retained as staff at an hourly wage. Miss Fowler's opinion, rendered in her quietly efficient way, was that this constituted fraud upon the probate court, breach of fiduciary duty, and unlawful conversion of a beneficiary's assets. She had already been in contact with the county sheriff's office. I put the documents in a folder, and I sat with them for a while. Then I went downstairs to find my son. He was in the carriage house, setting up for a dinner event. He was arranging chairs around tables with the practiced movement of someone who has done the same task hundreds of times. I stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment before he heard me and turned. "Can I help you?" he said. Guest voice. Polite. Automatic. "Thomas," I said. Something in his face changed. Not recognition. Not yet. Just a sudden stillness, like a man who hears his name said in a voice he can't quite place. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Do I know you?" "You do," I said, "though I don't look the way you remember." He stared at me. I watched him working through it. The white hair, the slower gait, the 8 years written into my face. I saw the moment it landed. He said very quietly, "Dad." "Yeah," I said. "It's me." He sat down in one of the chairs he had just arranged, which I understood, because I might have done the same. He put his hands flat on the tabletop and stared at them. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "They told me you were..." He stopped. "Floyd said the doctors didn't expect..." I know what Floyd said, I told him. I pulled a chair out and sat across from him, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. 8 years is a strange thing to sit across a table from. I could see all of it in his face. The confusion and the grief that had been replaced by other things, and now was rushing back in with a different shape. I've been working here for 6 years, he said at last, almost to himself. I thought it was the only thing I could do. Floyd said it was complicated. The estate, the debt. He said there were lawyers involved. He looked at me. There was no debt, was there? No, I said, there was no debt. He put his face in his hands for a moment. Then he lifted it, and he looked at me with his mother's eyes. And I thought about how he had come here and stayed, not because he was weak, but because this was the thing he built with me. And even when Floyd had taken the name off the door, Thomas had not been able to leave. What happens now? He said. I set the folder on the table. Now, I said, we do this correctly. Miss Fowler arrived in Greenville the following morning. She brought with her 2 colleagues, a package of court filings, and a letter from the county sheriff confirming that a formal inquiry into Floyd's trusteeship had been opened. I had asked Thomas not to say anything to Floyd before Miss Fowler arrived. He agreed, though it was a difficult thing to ask of him. He had been carrying the weight of this for years, and the news that his father was alive had shaken him in a way that needed time to settle. We had dinner together that evening, just the 2 of us, at a table in the corner of the dining room that I had chosen myself. The same corner where I used to do my bookkeeping on slow Tuesday afternoons. I did not tell him that. I just sat there, and we ate together, and I asked him about the last 8 years in the way you ask about something you missed and can't get back but still need to know. He told me about the first year, the hospital visits, the hope, and then the slow grief when hope became something harder to justify. He told me about Floyd's increasing involvement, the way he had moved in gradually, the way the trusteeship had felt like help at the time. He told me about the day he showed up to find his name had been removed from the management accounts. Floyd had explained it as a legal technicality. Thomas had been 27 years old and raw with loss, and he had not known what to fight. I should have fought harder, he said. You were 27, I told him, and you thought your father was gone. He was quiet for a moment. I have a daughter, he said. She's 4. Her name is June. He paused. I named her after Mom's middle name. I had not known about the grandchild. No one had told me. I had to set down my fork and look at the table for a moment before I could speak. I'd like to meet her, I said. She's staying with her mother's parents this week, he said. But yeah, she like her grandfather. We stayed at that table until the dining room cleared around us. I confronted Floyd the following morning. He came in at his usual time, around 9, and found me sitting at the front desk with Miss Fowler on one side of me and the folder open on the counter. He stopped in the doorway. His face did the thing that faces do when they realize the shape of the room has changed. Harold, he said, like the word was something he was testing the weight of. Floyd, I said. He looked at Miss Fowler. He looked at the folder. He looked at me again, and I watched him make a series of calculations very quickly. Then his face arranged itself into something that resembled warmth. Harold, he said again, differently this time. My God, I thought, when did you? He moved toward me with his arms opening the way he always moved toward things he wanted. Don't, I said. He stopped. I've read the trusteeship documents, I said. Ms. Fowler has reviewed them as well. I've also spoken with the county sheriff. Floyd's face went through several changes in a short period of time. The warmth dropped first. Then came something that looked like calculation, then something older and less attractive underneath that. You don't understand the situation, he said. When you were in the hospital, there were decisions that had to be made. Thomas wasn't capable. Thomas was 27 years old, I said. He was entirely capable. You told a probate court otherwise. Harold, you told people I was dead, I said. You told my son I was dead. You took the property he and I built together, and you put your wife's family name on it, and you paid my son an hourly wage to work in his own inheritance. Floyd said nothing. The calculation was still happening behind his eyes, but there was less to work with now. The inquiry is already open, Miss Fowler said. The court filings went in this morning. I'd encourage you to consult your own attorney before saying anything further. Floyd looked at me for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, I don't think he found it. I kept it running, he said finally. 8 years, Harold. I kept the lights on. You kept the income, I said. That's a different thing. He left. I watched him go through the front door and across the porch and down the steps, and I thought about how the last time I had walked down those steps, I had been 55 years old, and on my way to a supplier meeting I never arrived at. The legal process moved faster than I expected, partly because Miss Fowler is very good at her job, and partly because Floyd's trusteeship had been built on a foundation that did not hold up well to examination. The probate court vacated the trusteeship within 6 weeks of my filing. The sheriff's inquiry expanded to include financial records from the past 4 years of inoperations. Floyd hired an attorney. Floyd's attorney, after reviewing the records, advised him strongly to cooperate. There were difficult conversations, the kind that can't be resolved in a courtroom. Floyd called me twice during the process. The first time I let it go to voicemail, the second time I answered, and he said things I had heard before from people who have done wrong and want the other person to share the weight of it. That I should have updated my emergency contacts, that he had done his best in an impossible situation, that family should handle things as family. I told him that what he had done to Thomas was not something I was going to argue about on the phone. He did not call again. Thomas took over the management of the property in June. We spent an afternoon walking through the inn together, every room, the way we used to walk through it when we were still fixing it up, pointing out things that needed attention, things that were working well, things that had changed. He had strong opinions about what he wanted to do differently, and I sat with him in the carriage house over cold coffee and listened to all of it. He was a good operator. He had learned the business from the ground up, even under the circumstances he had learned it in, and he knew what needed to change. I asked him to take down the Hargrove House sign. He said, "What do you want to put back up?" I thought about it for a moment. We had called it the Ashwood Inn for 6 years, after the trees on the eastern edge of the property. The name had never felt like mine. I had chosen it because the property suggested it. It had always been about the place more than about us. "Something new," I said. "You pick it." He thought for a few days and then told me he wanted to call it the Wren and Rose Inn. The wren for the birds that nested in the rose garden every spring, the rose for what was already there. I told him it was a good name. It is. I moved back into room 7 in July. They had been using it as a storage room for the past few years, which I tried not to take personally. Thomas cleared it out over a weekend, and I brought my things in from the motel and stood at the bay window, looking out over the rose garden, the same way I used to do. It was not the same as before. I am not the same as before. My left leg still aches. I still lose words sometimes, mid-sentence, and have to wait for them to come back. I am slower and quieter, and I notice things I did not used to notice. The way light moves across a wooden floor in the morning. The particular silence after a house full of guests dozed to sleep. I met my granddaughter in August. Thomas brought her over on a Sunday, and she came through the front door and looked around the lobby with the frank assessment of a 4-year-old encountering a new environment, and then she looked at me and said, without any preamble, "Are you old?" I told her I was very old. She seemed to consider this acceptable and climbed up onto the chair across from me and asked if we had any juice. We had juice. We sat on the porch together that afternoon, the 3 of us, and I watched her run back and forth across the grass the way children do when they have energy and nowhere specific to put it. And Thomas sat beside me with his coffee, and we didn't say much. There was not much that needed saying. People ask me sometimes, at the inn, in the casual way that guests ask things when they've had a good dinner and the evening is slowing down, what it was like to come back after so long. They ask it with a kind of wondering in it, the way people ask about things that are beyond their ordinary experience, but that they want to understand. I tell them the truth, which is that coming back is not like waking up from sleep. There is no moment of refreshment, no clean start. You come back into a world that has been moving without you, a world where people have made decisions in your absence that you now have to live with. And the work of returning is the work of figuring out what of the old life is still there and what you have to build again from nothing. Floyd took 8 years from my son. He took the years when Thomas should have been growing into the business we built together, when he should have been making his own decisions, earning his own confidence. Those years are gone, and they cannot be given back. I know that. Thomas knows that. What I can do, what we are doing, is start from where we are. The rose garden is in bloom again. The carriage house is booked through October. Thomas has a good manager in the front desk now, a steady young man named Arlo, who remembers every guest's name and asks about their grandchildren the way Thomas himself used to do. My granddaughter has decided that she likes the porch swing best, and that she would like to help with the roses when she is older, and that I am, in her considered opinion, pretty old but okay. I think, on balance, that is enough. I think it is more than enough. The dawn came back, even if it took 8 years to get here. Some mornings I stand at the bay window in room 7, and I watch it arrive. Light moving across the rose garden, birds in the branches, the quiet sound of an inn waking up. And I think about the days when I did not know if I would ever see any of this again. And then I go downstairs and I have breakfast with my son, and we talk about what the day needs, and it is ordinary, and it is mine, and I do not take a single moment of it for granted. I have thought a lot about Floyd since all of this ended, not with anger that passed faster than I expected, but with something closer to sorrow, the kind you feel for a person who had every opportunity to be decent and chose otherwise anyway. Floyd did not steal from a stranger. He stole from his brother's son. He looked at a grieving 27-year-old who had just lost his father to a hospital bed and saw not a nephew in pain, but an opening. That is not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That is a choice made deliberately, sustained over years. And the thing about choices like that is they don't stay contained. They spread outward and touch everything. The people you work alongside, the people who trust you, the version of yourself you have to become to keep the lie going. I don't believe the world automatically corrects for that kind of thing. I have lived long enough to know that bad people sometimes keep what they take. But I also know that what Floyd built was hollow from the foundation. He had the name on the door, the income, the appearance of a man who had made something of himself. What he did not have was the knowledge of how to actually run the place, the relationships, the craft, the trust that Thomas and I had spent years building with every guest who walked through that door. You cannot steal those things. You can only pretend to have them, and pretending is exhausting, and it shows. Thomas stayed. That is what I keep coming back to. When Floyd stripped away everything, the title, the authority, the acknowledgement of what the property rightfully was, Thomas stayed and kept working, not because he was defeated, but because he was connected to the place in a way that no legal document could sever. That kind of integrity, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself, is the hardest thing in the world to manufacture, and the easiest thing to overlook until you see what happens in its absence. I was not a perfect father, I know that. I signed papers and assumed goodwill would fill in the rest. I trusted a family structure that I had not examined honestly in years. If I had been more careful, more clear-eyed about the people around me and the systems I was relying on, Thomas might have been protected better. That is something I have to sit with, and I do. What I try to pass on to him now, in the ordinary way that fathers pass things to sons when they are lucky enough to still be in the same room, is this, that clear thinking is not coldness, that knowing how the world works, how people work, how institutions work, how greed works, does not make you cynical. It makes you harder to deceive. I spent too many years assuming the best without verifying it. Thomas spent 8 years learning that lesson the hard way, so I didn't have to teach it to him directly. I wish it had gone differently. But he came through with his character intact, which is more than I can say for the man who thought he had won. My granddaughter asked me last Sunday whether I was going to stay at the inn forever. I told her I planned to. She thought about this for a moment, and then said she thought that was a good idea because the porch swing was the best one she'd ever been on. I think she's right. Some things are worth coming back for.